Okay, so that was 6 really interesting speakers, starting with Pablo and the Madasta Foundation. So I want to see if we've got any questions from the floor, because we've got about 5 minutes. Any questions? Questions from anybody? Okay, so I think we might have some questions from this side of the. You've got.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes. No. Yes. So in reality, how many companies are running with BIM and have a building passport? Could I commission a building that has a passport already today?
This is a question for Pablo.
Yeah, thank you. As I said, we're currently live in the Netherlands. We got 250 clients, up to 1.6 million square meters registered, and that's growing rapidly. So if you do have a BIM model, the upload is rather easy. If you have a company or an organization in the Netherlands, for the UK we need to roll out and to adjust the platform to local standards, local regulations. So we need to adjust the platform to make it an automatic process. Your other question, how many companies do have BIM models? The brilliant thing is that BIM is used in the world for about 10 years. And BIM models are being thrown away most often when the building is built, because who wants to store a document where you need very expensive software to actually read it? So it's being thrown away very often. And constructors do not use it or do not keep it, because they build it, run away, build a new building. So with an initiative like Madaster, it becomes profitable and it gives you opportunities to actually keep the BIM files, store it, and create new opportunities.
I think Richard wants to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I think that there's the BIM conversation is a really interesting one, and I just wanted to mention that someone's added another D to BIM, and we're now talking about 7D BIM, which includes performance, which brings up the performance as a service comment that Petra made, and also brings in sustainability around whatever metrics that you like. And we're working with a sort of cross-industry committee on blockchain and 7D BIM and smart contracts, and that sort of digitizing the process around delivering new built assets so that BIM models are not thrown away and they can be accessed, and the value from having that data in a digital format is then realized throughout the procurement process, the construction process, and the contract management process.
Does anybody want to speak? Anybody else want to speak about BIM before we move away from it? We've got a question over here first.
Oh, hi, thank you. If you accept the idea that smart cities and future cities will contain smart homes and future homes, I don't think anyone really addressed how the home might be changed in a smart city and how homeowners' behaviour might change in a smart city. And I wonder if anyone on the panel had some vision about what we need to prepare for in that context.
Richard?
Well, part of the work that we've been looking at and the project I mentioned at the end, called Principles Practices, with the MacArthur Foundation and RICS, has been looking at tenure models for buildings. And one of the really interesting things we've seen in the London market recently is the sort of explosive growth in build to rent. And that's incentivizing developers producing new homes to think much more carefully about the long-term material value of their development. So they're not just trying to sell it and get rid of it. They're thinking about, how do we retain people, how do we minimize void periods, and that kind of thing. So I think in that sort of context, where the business model is right to incentivize long-term thinking, then the value of sort of smart homes and things like Nest, things like smart thermostats can really start to be driven into the market more strongly.
We have another question over here.
Thank you. Is actually also part of the answer for implementing and not throwing away the BIM models, because the long-term view of a project is why.
Could you hold the microphone nearer your mouth? We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, that feeds into the answer of why BIM models are often discarded, because some contractors don't like the upfront cost on a project they're going to be out of in 6 months to 2 years, and they see that as a cost, not an investment which they'll carry into the next project. So that whole argument about why you need the BIM model once you've got the building done is not just for the build to rent, but the embedded skills and value that you get from the people delivering it over a longer period of time, not just the first project.
Does anybody want to comment about that, or shall we look for another question? Anybody got a question that isn't about BIM? Okay, yes, there's a question here.
How do you see the vision for pushing towards more modularity in businesses? Because that to me, that seems to be a major problem at the moment. How we move from sort of production to service industry.
Well, I think a systemic change is needed. So I think tying into what you're saying, on the one hand, we need to start designing our products so that they are modular and so that we can also exchange components between manufacturers. So I think that's really important. So I was always very skeptical about standards because they limit innovation, but I think in order to actually achieve a circular economy, we need to start standardizing certain aspects in order to make sure that we can actually all move to a circular economy and not to have a monopoly within a certain sector. I think that is one of the building blocks really to also move towards what Petran was talking about, is really this idea of product as a service or even city as a service, because only if you look at it systemically will we actually achieve, as Petran said, a cheaper, will it be cheaper than actually purchasing a product? Because right now, also because we've organized our economy in a hugely linear way, there are actually incentives that make it very difficult to make product as a service an attractive business model. But designing things, standardizing, making it more modular is absolutely key.
Okay.
Just to add to that, so at the moment we think about circular economy in the with the perspective of looking at just resources, but circular economy is not only preparing us for the lack of resources in the future, but the markets are changing more and more quickly, and what customers want, and then building on what was said about residential sector, people don't want to own homes for decades anymore. People want to be more mobile, so that modularity is really important to provide that flexibility. And apart from being resource efficient, that flexibility will be more and more important, and people will be willing to pay for it more as well in the future.
Bridget.
I may have misunderstood the question, so it may be a different interpretation of modularity, but when you asked it, I thought to the buildings and how we design them. We often talk about designing them for modularity. And what does that mean? Well, in reality, it meant two things. One was that we cabled it in a way, and we didn't put partition walls up, in a way that means we've been able to reconfigure the space inside our buildings. It's a 10-story building housing 6,000 people, and as our workforce changes and we employ more people in one team and we'll move some from one place to another, we've been able to reconfigure the building multiple times over without any waste. So there's been no partition walls that have had to come down. We haven't had to dig stuff up in order to put cabling in to get telephony or to get connectivity anymore. And we've maximised the space utilisation by making sure that any offices, which have now virtually disappeared, are actually just meeting rooms. And in my favourite deployment, we've obviously got what other people would all call hot desking. We call it hoteling because it's a bit genteel. But anyway, and the latest move of this is actually a phenomenal little Harry Potter Marauders map, where when you come in the morning, there's a flight deck screen that shows you where everybody's sitting in the building and whether the desks are taken or not. And there's a sensor underneath the desk, which means that it's yours for 2 hours. If you leave it for more than 2 hours, it's unallocated and somebody else can use it. So we've done all sorts of phenomenal stuff. All our canteen space, our restaurant space is now moved so it can be used as meeting space as well. We've looked at all the dead spaces and how we can make them, we talk about modularity, how we can make them fungible and usable to the max in order to get the most out of the building, better for cost and better for carbon.
Thank you. Let's move on. We've got one final question.
Thanks. Hi. I just wondered who the panel thought was going to kind of drive the wider change to the circular economy. Is it government, central or local? Is it big business? Is it third sector? What are your thoughts on
We need it all. I know this is a very unsatisfactory answer because you might want one answer, but we really need government to place the incentives in order to make it economically attractive to move towards a circular economy. We need businesses for scale, so I think it's wonderful what PwC is doing. And we also need startups to show what these innovations are, and hopefully larger organizations like PwC can then help scale that. And we also, of course, we still need the pressure of third parties, of NGOs to push the laggards up and make people aware. So I really think it is a systemic change and everyone should take their part in it. Otherwise, we're not going to manage.
Richard?
Yeah, great question. As part of our work with the EMF, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we interviewed more than 100 built environment stakeholders around Europe, 5 European cities, working from sort of the investment and client community the whole way through to contractors, subcontractors, and demolition contractors. And we asked everyone the same question: who needs to act, and what do they need to do, and in what order? And the conclusion we drew from that was more or less that while everyone needs to change and everyone needs to act, we think the client sector and the investment sector are best placed to act first because they define what good looks like on a project, and they also have control over the business model by which returns on investment are realized in the sector. And we sort of, once we have that sector acting and engaged in the conversation, creating pilots, creating demonstration projects, then the policymakers have told us if they see evidence from those pilot projects, they will then act to make sure everyone else follows the leaders to sort of make the transition sort of across the entire sector.
Petran. Oh, sorry, Bridget.
Sorry, Bridget. We'll be right back to you. Interesting to see the sum, Cecile, you made about profit and revenues and cost and taxes. And I think a very important factor which has to be added to the sum, and this might be because of governments are going to demand it or ask for it, is carbon pricing. Carbon emission pricing or embedded carbon pricing might going to make a difference in the sum in the profitability. Because if we're adding the carbon price in the product or in the service or whatever you do, you'll get another equation between used products and less raw materials and materials which are locally made.
Really good point, Petran. So I think Bridget wants to say something, and then we're going to close up.
So I think the answer to your question depends on which sector we're talking about. I won't talk to construction because there's people way more qualified than me to do that here. But I will talk about one area where I am hopeful, and that is in the area of packaging. We have the most ridiculous waste collection system in the UK, completely decentralised, fragmented. It's impossible for consumers to understand what they should do, even if they want to do the right thing in their homes. And I think the phenomenal thing is that Blue Planet 2 and then everybody getting angry about plastics means that we're in a place where government will regulate in the UK, building on the work that's been done in the EU. And so I'm really hopeful, actually, that will be something that, and all of the people who are producing consumer goods with packaging are now trying to work out what the hell they do, because we've lived with plastic. It's phenomenally useful, but we can't continue in the same way. That also gives me hope for something else, because in the past my heroes were some of the great leaders, the great orators and the people who have showed vision, whether they were business or they were in the public sector or in positions of influence around the world. My hero at the moment is Greta Thunberg, the 15-year-old Swedish girl who's sitting outside the parliament every Friday, who has triggered climate strikes among the kids around the world. And they are speaking to business people and to governments in a way that we have not been able to reach so far. And so I think actually that it's up to us as citizens to speak out for what we want. I'm hoping there's a race to the top on product design and circularity, and I know it's been taught in universities. My nephew is studying design, and circularity is right at the forefront of that. So I'm hoping that good design, where we've got exemplars, will come through in academia, come through education, and we'll get a race to the top. For many more products. But I think we all just have to be really active. I think the answer to this is to be a mini activist, whether it's in your organization, it's in your home, it's as a citizen of the UK or of the world. And we really have to show stewardship at an individual level if we're going to get anywhere close to this now.
Thank you very much, Bridget. A round of applause for all our speakers: Pablo, Richard, Petran, Bridget, Alex and Cecile. I think as the curator of this event, that's sort of what I was doing, is finding all these mini and even bigger than mini activists who are all in different fields, different sectors, all making it work. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Our next one is at 1:30, and that's Nick Gant, The Miracle of Plastic, including Mark Miodownik, who I mentioned earlier. I hope you can come to that. Thank you very much for attending.